Howdy dudes and not dudes, it's Megan as usual. I guess I'm back? I didn't really go anywhere so much as my health forced me to take an unannounced break. Don't worry, I didn't catch COVID-19 despite my city ranking in the top 10 of new cases per capita in the country last week. That's a statistic I did not want to be proud of. No, I haven't caught a new illness, I'm just being plagued by an existing one. Some of you know me personally, so this isn't news to you, and anyone who's watched my videos for an extended period of time probably knows this too. But in case some people are still in the dark, I have benign tumors in most of my joints. Usually this amounts to symptoms not unlike arthritis. My go-to method of dealing with it is to just pop a couple Tylenol and try not to think too hard about it. Recently though, the golf ball-sized tumor in my right knee has been causing problems with a capital P. I don't know how many of my viewers struggle with a chronic pain condition, but it knocks you on your ass some days. And sometimes it knocks you on your ass for many days. Usually I would measure my pain level at a 2 or 3. Recently though, it's hovered in the 7 and 8 range. Between that and going back to work, I just didn't have the energy to film anything when I got home. To be honest though, I didn't have a lot to say in June anyways. Last month was an exercise in failure for me. This was for a number of reasons. I didn't read as many books as I wanted to, I didn't post as many videos as I wanted to, I didn't really get nearly any of the things done that I had planned to do. Yes, my right knee has been a swollen, throbbing nightmare for nearly 2 weeks now, and I've spent any time I'm not at work in bed with an ice pack wrapped around it, but I feel bad that I've been letting my already inconsistent YouTube schedule get away from me. I'm not really sure what I'm doing with this video, I just know I need to get something up before everyone thinks I've gone off and died. So today I want to talk about the books that I read in June, as much as I have to say about that anyway. I set myself up for failure in June, really. If I had posted a TBR video, we would just be sitting here talking about all the books that I didn't read. It escapes me why I thought putting 6 books on my TBR for the month of June was a good idea, especially when one considers that it's been a struggle for me to even read just 2 to 4 books in the last few months. Combine that with my going back to work full-time, it was foolishly optimistic at best to think that I could read that many books. I am doing better in July though. It's only 9 days into the month and I've already finished 2 books, I'm halfway through a third, the reading rush is coming up at the end of the month. I feel like July is my month to get out of this reading slump, but that's a different video, probably multiple videos. So I read 2 of the 6 books I put on my TBR for June. I would list the books I didn't get to, but I'm not really up to putting all of my failures out there for the world to see. Well, not this time anyway. As always, usual disclaimers go here. I'm gonna try to avoid spoilers, but you've been warned. Most if not all the books I talk about will be linked below. Click on them to your heart's content. I don't get any money from this. Alright, on to the books. The first book I read was Off to Be the Wizard by Scott Meyer, which is the first in his Magic 2.0 series. Amazon/Kindle has been advertising this book to me for nearly a year now. I ignored it at first because I thought it was one of those books where some dude gets transported into a fantasy world and he's a god or savior or whatever. In case you can't tell from my tone, the isekai genre of anime, not my favorite. I also at some point thought this was a game lit or lit RPG book, which is also too close to the isekai genre and just not something that's interested me in the past. For context, isekai, and I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that, is a genre of Japanese media where a normal person from Earth is transported, reborn, or otherwise trapped in a fantasy world. Game lit or lit RPG is a genre of books that takes place in a game or has game mechanics. Imagine if someone took your Dungeons & Dragons campaign and wrote it into a book, but they kept all the talk about levels and rules and such. Unsurprisingly, there tends to be a lot of overlap here since so many isekai anime take place in video games. Sword Art Online is really just the first example that comes to mind. But Off to Be the Wizard is a little different in that it doesn't involve going to a fantasy world so much as it involves time travel. It's about a hobbyist programmer who finds a file that if he edits actually changes things in the real world. He gets a little carried away, draws a bit too much attention to himself, and has to enact his escape plan. That brilliant plan is to use the file to time travel back to the Middle Ages and pretend to be a wizard until he figures out how to deal with the other situation. In the end, I only decided to give this book a chance because I finally read the synopsis and noticed the similarities between its premise and books that I enjoyed when I was younger. Rick Cook's Wizardry series was something I really enjoyed in middle school and early high school. Those books were about a Silicon Valley IT guy who gets summoned into a fantasy world by someone hoping to conjure a powerful wizard to fight off a great evil. It doesn't go too well until our protagonist learns that he can manipulate magic with his programming skills. Granted, it's been near enough to 20 years since I read that series. Who's to say that if I read it now, I would enjoy it as much as I did back then, now that I'm much older and have a wider variety of books to compare it to anyway. Still, Off to Be the Wizard struck a similar tone with me, and I was hoping it would capture that magic, so to speak. While on the surface the premise seems the same, they're actually two different series. In the end, I gave Off to Be the Wizard 3 stars. It was okay, it was just fine. There were really too many things that held this book back for me though. The first issue I had was this book being mostly set up for the rest of the series. It was all building the world, introducing characters, and showing everyone how the magic worked. I knew this was probably going to be the case going into it because this is the first in a 6-book series. It might have bothered me less though if the overall story of the first book was more interesting, and that leads me to my second issue. The plot was just really boring. The minute you meet a certain character, it's not hard to guess that he's the bad guy in the story, as much of a story as there is. There are hints throughout the book that something isn't right, but it's mostly ignored by everyone until they can physically no longer ignore it towards the end of the book. There's even a red herring thrown in there towards the end of the plot, which was not worth entertaining because it was very clear who was behind everything. At least I thought it was. I do tend to just peg people as villains in stories, and one of these days I might even be wrong. I'm gonna lump this next problem in with my first 2 issues, and it's gonna sound like a weird complaint, but this book was funny at times just for the sake of funny. There were multiple instances where things were just absurd to just be absurd. Reading Good Omens and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy really taught me that I don't enjoy books with that element. Don't get me wrong, I like a bit of humor in my books from time to time. I don't particularly enjoy it when it's the focus of the book, though. It felt like we wasted a lot of pages on the bathroom habits of modern-day people pretending to be medieval wizards and 2 people staring each other down for an uncomfortably long time while the author describes the psychological struggle going on between the 2. My last problem with the book was that I felt it leaned on some outdated stereotypes, and I don't mean just for this day and age, but even for the time it was published back in 2013. There's a moment where all the wizards, other programmers who had to flee to the Middle Ages after messing with the file too much, they've gathered to meet the main character before some test. And our main character likens it to a typical gathering at a science fiction convention. I've been going to conventions for a good 15 years now, and I can tell you that a good portion of people there don't fit into some neat cookie-cutter mold of what pop culture would consider a nerd. I also noticed that all but one of the wizards in this book are dudes. This is probably only obvious to me because I have lady parts, and it does make some sense when you consider how medieval Europe might have reacted to a woman wielding magic. But there is a point where some of the characters are talking about Atlantis, which is where the lady wizards have gone and they're in charge. Again, better than being burned at the stake, I agree. My problem with it comes when the other wizards talk about being reluctant to go there because they're afraid of what they might find in a city where primarily women are in charge. These aren't men from medieval ages growing up at a time where women were property and really just there for keeping the home and making the babies. These were men from more modern ages where that kind of thinking is a little backwards. So many of the wizards in this book acted in a very boys will be boys kind of manner. As a lady, it was just a bit off-putting. Again, this book is humorous. It was written by a guy who cut his teeth as a stand-up comedian. It appears that all of the books in his vast library would fall into some kind of comedy genre. So I don't want to slap a label on the author and call him sexist. I feel that a lot of that sort of thinking was just the character's perspective, and these thoughts and stereotypes were leaned into because of their somewhat benign comedic value. But it was difficult for me, personally, to keep it from bothering me. I know it sounds like I didn't like the book, but it was an entertaining read. For as many faults as the story had, the characters were a lot of fun. They were really the thing that kept me reading in the end. I thought the main character's mentor was just a funny guy. Every interaction he had with the wizard going around calling himself Merlin was hilarious. He and the town priest also had the best relationship. The one lady wizard was a well-done character who wasn't taking shit from anybody. I just wish there had been more than one of her. And the magic, while based in programming, wasn't so steeped in the jargon that it was impossible to understand. If you don't mind a book being funny for the sake of being funny, it's not a bad read. There's a very slim chance that I might continue the series down the road if I don't have anything else going on. From the synopsis of the second book, it looks like our main character and his mentor go out to Atlantis where all the lady wizards are. Admittedly, I am rather curious to see how this author handles that. You know, how he portrays women and how the other characters react to them. Because again, we only had the one woman in this book. The end of this book also teases a little bit of what we might expect from the series going forward, and it's interesting enough, just not interesting enough to keep me reading. Though I do have to warn you about the existential crisis this book might give you. It operates off the idea, or at least many of the characters think it does, that our world isn't real so much as it is a very advanced computer simulation. In the end, we're all just lines of code, man. I have a hard enough time grappling with my own mortality and my place in the world. I don't need a book reminding me that maybe none of it's real. So yeah, to sum it up, 3 stars for Off to Be the Wizard by Scott Meyer. Funny read if you're into that sort of thing. The second book I read in June was Dark Disciple by Christy Golden. I read 300 of this book's 317 pages in a day because June 30th had come around and I hadn't read a second book for the month. I'll put a link to the video if I remember, but I stated towards the beginning of the year that I wanted to read 2 books a month every month in 2020. This was a struggle last month for a number of reasons, but mainly because I went back to work full-time. No easing into it, no more partial unemployment, went from a 3-month vacation to 30 to 35 hours a week. Our virus numbers are spiking in town due to primarily community spread, and I work in the mall. No one is wearing masks because I'm surrounded by people who don't think this is a real problem. Deep breaths. This 2 books a month thing is something I've attempted and failed for the last 2 years. In 2018, I kind of gave up before I really started, but that's because I made a series of decisions that sort of ruined my life that year. Reading just took a bit of a backseat to everything. In 2019, I was doing very well until June, at which point I just stopped reading? 2020 is my year though, I feel it. Well, sort of. At the very least, if I fail, I'd like to at least make it to October. So far so good though, even if that means I had to cram an entire book into one day, which is something I've done before, but because the books were good or so bad I needed the nightmare to be over. Not because I was in some mad dash to read a book before the end of the month. Dark Disciple is a Star Wars book that I was technically buddy reading with my brother, in that he and I started reading it at the same time, but he's slow and I needed to finish a second book in June, so oops. My friends and I have been playing an unhealthy amount of Star Wars Battlefront 2 on PS4. This has inspired many a deep and heated discussion about the new canon, the canon of Star Wars post-Disney's Purge. This has also inspired my brother to start reading the books of the new canon. He put out a call on Facebook for his fellow Star Wars fans to give him their top 5 new canon books. From there, he picked out a few to read first. Now, I've read many of the new canon books. In fact, one of my top 5 books of all time is a newer Star Wars book. The fact that I owned Lost Stars for nearly 3 years before I read it was a travesty, but that's besides the point. Besides, this seemed like a good excuse to catch back up. My brother and I could read the books at the same time and talk about them, because we talk about everything else anyways. Seriously, the number of times he'll text me at some abnormal hour of the night to ask me the meaning of a song's lyrics is staggering. Why not add far too serious discussions about Star Wars canon to our post-midnight conversation? Dark Disciple is a Star Wars book that follows Asajj Ventress and a Jedi by the name of Quinlan Vos as they try to kill Count Dooku. The plot is obviously much more complicated than that, but that's the basics. The book was actually written from several unproduced episodes of the Clone Wars television show. I'm not going to go into too much detail because my brother watches these videos and he's still reading the book, but I ended up giving it 4 stars. The plot was great, the pacing was very well done. It was actually kind of fun getting to see all the different perspectives in the book. Getting to see so many sides of the story left you with more knowledge than some of the characters had, and it was kind of fun waiting for the other shoe to drop. One of the things that surprised me so much was that the character personalities match so closely to what we've seen in the movies and TV shows. Dark Disciple is the first Star Wars book I've read that features so many characters from one of the Star Wars television shows, and not ones that appear primarily in movies. So I went into this a little worried about the characters being too different, but thankfully I was worried for mostly nothing. I was familiar with Christie Golden as an author before this book. Having been an avid player of World of Warcraft for over a decade, it's hard not to hear about her. She's one of Blizzard's go-to writers for the in-canon novels tied to the game. I've even owned books written by her in the past, but I've moved so many times since then that I have no idea where they are, and who amongst us has not purchased a great many books that they'll probably never read? My boss, whose opinion I have not yet dismissed despite her being a filthy hoardie, has a pretty good taste in books, and she's recommended her in the past. Considering that I did like Dark Disciple, I may be reading more by Golden in the future. And that's it for all the books that I've read. Outside of reading, I've been doing a little bit of research this month on increasing the production quality for the channel. You know, proper camera, better lighting, good microphone, a background that isn't the beige wall disaster that is my bedroom. I'm not sure how much I'm willing to invest in this channel just yet, though. I don't make any money off of this. Anything I put into this channel is a loss for me, and money I'll have to take away from somewhere else in my budget. I could justify upgrading my microphone because I use it for more things than just recording videos, and my headset had finally died after 5 years of faithful service. And I can get a cheap ring light / tripod combination to upgrade my lighting setup a little bit because my tripod broke and that leaves me without a stable way to use my phone as a camera. Those are cheap enough that I can probably get one on my next payday without causing myself too much trouble, but a solid camera is going to cost me between $300 and $400 at a minimum. That's not happening anytime soon, at least not for a few months. That's nearly 2/3 of one of my normal paychecks. I could dip into my savings for my unemployment, but I'm so paranoid to make such a big purchase because I'm terrified of needing the money for a real emergency. I'm currently setting aside money specifically to buy a good camera, but it's gonna be a hot minute before that happens. Is that everything? I can't think of anything else I wanted to talk about, so I guess I'm done. Coming up soon, I should have a book haul because I've never done one, and I've recently acquired maybe too many books. I'll actually be filming that right after recording this. I'm just waiting for my phone to charge since it is my camera. I've also got a video for what I've read, what I'm reading, and what I plan to read for July. And then there's the reading rush happening in a little over a week, so I've got a video to do for that too. I guess I really just need to get off my ass and finally do some work. Time to wrap this up and release all of you beautiful humans back into the wild. As always, consider hitting the like button because it makes me feel a tiny bit fuzzy inside when I see that someone has liked one of my videos. Subscribe to get maybe notified about my next upload, whatever the hell that's gonna be. I love interacting with you guys in the comments, so hit me up, suggestions for books, videos, or whatever. Or you can just say hi, I'm not picky, just a little bit needy. Thanks for watching, wear your mask, stay the hell away from each other, be nice to retail workers right now, and I'll see you in the next video.